Welcome to the Pro-2-Pro podcast, where we explore the stories and strategies of successful entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Hanenian, and in each episode, I'll be sitting down with a different guest to learn about their journey, their challenges, and their insights into building a successful business. As a lawyer who works with industry leaders, I've seen firsthand the passion and drive that it takes to turn an idea into a thriving enterprise. And in this podcast, I want to share those stories with you, our viewers and listeners. Whether you're an inspiring entrepreneur, a seasoned business owner, or just someone who loves a good success story, you'll find something to inspire and inform you in each episode. So sit back, relax, and join us as we dive into the world of entrepreneurship and discover the insights that can help you succeed in your own business. Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Pro-2-Pro. I have with me my friend and my new friend and our guest, Joe Barry from Merz Aesthetics. Joe, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Keith. Happy to be here. I feel like I've known you forever.
I know. We've got that unique connection. Thank you for joining us.
So you're welcome, and thanks for having me.
So we talked about a bunch of things offline. I wanted to, for our viewers and for our listeners, you're in a position now, obviously you're general counsel of this huge organization, but you didn't just get there. You bounced around. You did so many things. So why don't you just go back and share with us some of your formative years leading you up to where you are now?
I always like to start with the first time I actually worked for a living, which is when I shined shoes at the Ideal Barbershop in Queens. Frank and Joe Locasano, who were from Italy, and I'd known them forever. My family moved to our house in Queens when I was about 1 month old. And so we used to go to this barber in Queens, he was from Italy, and I shined shoes for a little while. They had one of those automatic shoe things, and sometimes someone would look at me and go over and use that, almost like a slap in my face. But you got to get, and I don't remember what I charged, but I was there like a couple of Saturdays. And after a while, like when you're 12, you don't want to be sitting in a barbershop on a Saturday. But then a friend of mine got a newspaper route, and I was helping him with it for a bit and getting paid, but probably not enough. I wasn't an equity holder, but I put I put my name on the list to become a newspaper boy. I grew up in a very much a sort of a blue-collar neighborhood. My parents were teachers, but one of 6 kids, and I originally was delivering Newsday, which is a Long Island paper that not a lot of people in Queens read, but the big time was the New York Daily News. You got that route. You made money. I think you would agree. Blue-collar, middle-class people, a bit better tippers than rich people. That's just across the board.
Learned that. I worked for a catering company. I learned that a long way.
Isn't that amazing? And the paper was like 85 cents, then it went to 90, and some people just kept giving you the dollar. So I delivered papers. You're running. I always tell people you are running a business. You're buying the papers at wholesale. You're getting a break on the price. And on every Saturday, you'd pick up your Sunday supplements, and then you'd pay the guy for the papers. And then, you'd hang out. A bunch of guys would be hanging out, reading the paper. So anyway, I did that actually until I was almost 18. I was making a lot of money. It was off the books. You're like I said, you're running a business. You have your supply chain.
I remember I did a paper route too. I remember a couple of things about it. I remember the holidays. I loved Christmas because you would hopefully get a little bit more as a tip for Christmas. And I also remember they had some hybrid arrangement where if you sold enough papers or you did something, you could buy something from a book. I don't know if you had that. Do you remember that?
Do that, yes. Or you could sometimes get tickets at the baseball games. But there were incentives to go. They used to call it soliciting. You got to go soliciting. And you didn't have to. And the thing about the Daily News is so many people already got it. It was kind of hard to sign up new customers. And when I went on vacation, I'd tell somebody, these are the 3 houses on the block that don't get the Daily News. They were the oddballs.
So you did it. You did it through high school, huh? Till you were 18.
I did.
Wow.
Yeah. It was good money off the books. My brother got a job at Burger King, and when I did the math, I was making more per hour. I mean, I was at one point I was working at 8 hours a week, and I was making back then. I mean, at one point I was making $40 or $50 a week, and it was $5 an hour when the minimum wage was 2 and change, and they were taking tax. So it made sense, and freedom and everything.
So you it sounds to me like you always had a work ethic. You had it from a young age. Where do you think that came from?
No doubt about it. My parents and my grandparents. My grandparents came from Ireland. My father's father ran speakeasies illegally during Prohibition. And then he opened up a bar that didn't work out, Barry's Bar and Grill on Columbus Avenue. And he became a doorman. And my dad always talked about how his father, who actually sold a cow and booked passage on a ship similar to Titanic, and he came over in like 1950. He was hustling, running, getting cabs, and he worked twice as hard as guys half his age, my dad would say. And his wife, my grandmother, was a court officer in New York, the New York City courts. And on the other side of the family, my mother's father, also they were both from Ireland, and he was in World War I, a Silver Star for rescuing somebody from the no man's land, pulled them back to safety, and then he became a New York City fire chief. And my mother's mother was a domestic and cleaned houses and cooked for priests. And I have a few things in my bag, and one of them is a copy of her application for Social Security. She applied when she was 68. She had been working off the books all along.
Wow.
And she got a gig with somebody in Southampton. They'd go out there for the summer sometimes. My mother, very close to both my parents. They both passed on a long time ago. They both lived very long. She went on to get a master's degree in math, physics.
Wow.
One of my aunts was saying she was up against guys coming out of World War II, and she got A's. So, and then my dad always hustled. He had a interesting series of jobs. He took a while to find his niche, but he was in the Army, Air Corps, and then he tried real estate. He worked for A&P at one point, doing various things, and then he went to grad school and became a teacher. He taught at a couple of high schools on Long Island. He worked weekends as a librarian at the Port Washington Public Library. So I guess I just saw everybody in my family and my immediate circle, everybody just worked, and you worked and you hustled. And then I ended up, my best friend's father managed some housing. We did a series of jobs like painting parking lot lines, cleaning up the apartments. And so we just did all sorts of kind of wacky jobs. And my second summer there, so my friend's father had actually bought the buildings. They had a pool, and I had to scrape the pool and repaint it, and then I had to paint the line between the deep end and the shallow end. And I had no idea, like it kind of looked like a banana peel, like you're running the roller, and the guy I was working for, he business partners with my friend's father, and he just called me college boy, because at that point I was hey, college boy, what the hell was wrong with you? He was from Bulgaria.
Where were you going to school at that time?
Fordham. I was
that's right,
yeah.
Fordham. That's right. Okay.
And he was from Bulgaria, and he's a college boy. What the hell's doing? I felt like saying they don't teach you how to paint pool lines in college. And then this other worker showed me how to do it. Like, so if I ever have to paint a pool line again.
So it goes back to some of the things that I did this rant about younger youth, and we'll talk about that as well. As far as your work ethic development, you were able to hear stories from your parents. You were able to hear stories from your grandparents. You basically learn about how hard they work. You saw how hard they worked to do what they had to do. So it kind of was innate in you that you were gonna work. Period.
There was no doubt about it. It was never a question. Yeah, it's something that wouldn't even cross my mind. Of course you're gonna work. I mean, that's what you do.
And I think that's part of the issue that we deal with some of the younger generation now, where they don't have a point of reference, and it even goes, I think, to when we get into talk about politics, and we could jump all around on our conversation, but even when they these young kids talk about socialism and fascism, and they think that all this stuff and the appropriation of genders and all this other stuff, they didn't see what our parents went through, with what our grandparents went through to get to where they are. And they're devoid of that, and they're devoid really of history.
Right.
And I think that in part is the challenge that we're faced with this youth. That we deal with, and I'm sure you even deal with it in the workforce. So we talk about your role, but I just wanted to bring that up as some of my comments.
And I know your background. Your dad owned laundromats. I mean, that's blood, sweat, and tears, and you were getting coins. You probably were getting some risky places, and you did it routinely.
Yeah. My dad, God bless him, he's passed too, but he shared stories with me. He had a store in Harlem on Lenox Avenue, and he was there when the riots took place.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And he one of his dry cleaning stores, he said to me that they took care of him because he took care of them.
That's interesting.
He respected the neighborhood and the people respected him. And he had another store as time progressed on 89th and Madison, around the block from the Guggenheim. Oh, wow. I remember working at that store. Demographically, he had stores at different locations. Yeah. And when I was a young boy, I would go in and work with him, and I saw the sweat. I saw the pressers. He had to start the boilers and how everything worked out. And then my grandfather, who worked for the Brooklyn Eagle way back when and had retired, he came to work with my father.
That's wild.
And he came over. He was born in Alexandria, Egypt. My grandfather.
I was
going to
say
side.
second
So,
generation.
and moved over to Brooklyn. He spoke 7 languages fluently.
Wow.
I mean, you raised in France, but again, it goes to me basically watching and seeing them all working their ass off too to get. We didn't know any different.
You didn't know any different.
The fast forward, I'm working in a catering business, and just like you said, I'm delivering food. I'm doing all this stuff, setting up these parties, and I figure out real quickly that the house that's maybe got 2 bedrooms that's worth maybe $50,000 or $60,000, where I set everything up, versus the house that's maybe worth $500,000 or $1 million, I'm going to get more tip from that smaller household owner than the larger, and I'm going to get more respect.
Yes,
from the smaller homeowner. And I learned that in life too. And I guess for me, what ends up happening is that you never take anybody for granted, and you always treat somebody the same ways that you would want to be treated. And again, from my formative years, I developed, that kind of innate feeling towards dealing with people,
Yeah, and it's interesting. And you triggered a memory. I'll jump ahead a bit, but I'll jump back. But I worked at a firm called Shea & Gould. The weird thing is there was some partners who were like pudgy little guys with glasses, and they'd be like, we're going to war, we're going to kick their ass. And they'd even sometimes use vulgarities. And my brother John and I were like, I've seen people punch their face in the boss. I'm not saying I'm going to do it in a law firm. Some of these guys, like the kids that grew up in Scarsdale, they've never been punched in the face or seen anybody punch anybody. And I think you could talk down to somebody. And I mean, a couple times I said, don't talk to me that way. But then somebody else is like, you know what, I'll throw you out the fucking window. And they got all around the firm. Like, you can't let people, just because you have a law degree. And another one of those funny coincidences of life, a girl from my neighborhood who I hadn't seen in years, and I was interviewing, and she goes, Joe Barry, I saw the name. I didn't know it was you. Like, wow, Joe from the old neighborhood. You work at this big, prestigious law firm. I'm like, yeah, what do you do? She goes, well, I'm the secretarial supervisor, so my work always got done. And again, I treated people. I see some guy, they'd come in and yell at the word processors. They would bury your work. They would just, and you can see that. Look, we've seen you young associates come and go. You get churned out in 5 years. Don't come just because you went to Harvard or Yale doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, it's so true. Our industry, it's so true. Back then, especially back then, I remember all that, and I remember the condescension. It was mind-boggling to me. I remember being judged when I was going through that process for my accent, for where I went to school, for how I behaved. It was this Aryan view, mind-boggling, and I never understood it. I just never understood it, and to this day, I will not tolerate it. To me, it's like it's just mind-boggling.
We had a summer associate from a good school. We were chatting, and he goes, "Where'd you go to law school?" I said, "I went to St. John's." He went, "Wow, and we hired you?" I'm like, I'm here, buddy. I'm in the seat. So, wow. But back to your point about the working, it's not just your parents, it's your aunts and uncles, and everybody worked. And I had three uncles who were police officers. One of whom was my godfather. I had an uncle who was a firefighter. I mean, and they had rough, dangerous jobs too. And they'd even, like, when you're a kid, I want to be a firefighter cop. Like my uncle, like, no, Joe, you're too smart for that. And he wasn't knocking. He's like, you're going to do something else. You're going to.
Yeah.
So I ended up, I went to Fordham. I majored in history. And, kind of when you're a history major, you're either going to be a teacher or you're going to go to grad school. And I'm not into science. I'm not into blood. So I was like, the doctor thing wasn't going to be the case. But I ended up taking the LSAT. And my dad had got me a job during the summers working on it was a Cross Bay and the Marie Parkway Bridge and the Reese Park parking field. And that was big money. I remember when I was making $60 a day, which divided by 8, that was 7 and change an hour, and it was very desired. That was after my freshman year, and then sophomore year it didn't come through right away. And I called the guy, Frank Keegan. I said, "Hey, this is Joe Barry. I worked there last summer. You got any jobs?" Like, "Oh, wait, let me." And then I'm like, "And by the way, my brother could use a job too." So and then I ended up getting jobs for 5 of the 6 of us. I'm one of 6 kids. And was 7 years and 3 months apart, very condensed. And no twins somehow. It just worked. My mother was basically pregnant throughout the 60s. But I got 2 of my friends' jobs and the 5 of us, and it was great money. And the day after I graduated college, I went to work on the Whitestone Bridge, which between the Bronx and Queens. And I remember it was a Monday, and the night before we'd gone to dinner in the Bronx, a real great place, Mario's. And next day, I'm collecting tolls. I'm like, what? And I had friends that were driving to California, taking the summer. I mean, literally the day after I graduated college, I was collecting tolls. I'm kind of like, what the hell am I doing here? But
right, always working.
Always working. I mean, at one point, I was security guard for a little bit of Pinkerton security guard. And that was the funniest thing. My brother and I laugh about it. He had an employee manual, and one of the things it said is, if your relief comes and gets you and there's alcohol on his breath, don't let him relieve you. Come to the office and we'll send another security guard. Like they knew everybody was boozing it. And anyway, I worked as a toll collector. I started applying. I was on waitlisted at St. John's, and they had a program that started in February, and then you take summer classes. And I got in the second session. And meanwhile, my mother, this one again, the amazing coincidence when I think back. My mother read the Tablet, which was a Catholic newspaper in Brooklyn, and they'd have articles about parishes. There was an advertisement, and I interviewed with the lady, and she goes, I think that's a little bit boring for you, but there's another opening in the library. And the job, it was at Weil Gotshal, which is a very big law firm. They're in the GM building on 5th Avenue and 59th Street. And that's what I began learning about, like this whole idea that there were these, the euphemism was the midtown firms, because they weren't downtown, and they were hiring people that the downtown firms wouldn't hire. Maybe they, like I said, Jewish and Catholic people. And the firm had a big specialty in bankruptcy, real estate. And my job was to skim the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Law Journal. And I had a list of our clients. I still remember Johns Manville, International Harvester. And if they were mentioned in the article, I'd make a photocopy and we'd send it to a distribution list so the partners would know. Any associates, like, Johns Manville was in the newspaper.
That's like you're your own little SEO. You were doing like little Google searches.
Yes,
way back in the day on behalf of your clients.
And I was doing it for a while, and then there was a guy, something crazy happened, like a file cabinet fell over and it hurt him. Then I took his job on for a while, so it was a bit of a promotion. I felt bad for the guy, so I worked there, and then I started law school, and I reached out to my connections at the Bridge. They have weekend toll collectors, and I knew when I was there, like they teachers and stuff, and they make a little extra money working on a Saturday and Sunday. And I was lining that up, and then the head librarian at Weil Gotshal, Blanche, she goes, well, what are you thinking of doing? I said, well, I could get a job as a toll collector. She goes, well, we could use a weekend bookshelver here. There's people that come in on Saturdays and Sundays. So I worked at Weil Gotshal in the library, and again, it was really good money. They took good care of me. And one of the things that kind of, you learn your lessons everywhere, as you know, Keith. It's like, like sometimes someone would come in, a young guy, and it'd be like, is so-and-so here? Ira Milstein was famous. He was a very famous part. Harvey Miller. These were guys, you'd see them in the Wall Street Journal, heavy litigators, corporate guys. And it's like, is Ira here? I'm like, yeah, I saw him. He goes, good. I'm just going to walk around, make sure he sees that I'm here. I remember thinking, that's kind of messed up, but that's how a lot of those law firms were. I mean, you were expected to be seen in the library. And
well, that's another thing that people don't realize in our generation. And when we went to law school, when we were raised during that time period, we didn't really have the computers. I mean, we used computers more or less as a glorified typewriter.
Exactly.
And we had to go into the library and pull books, and we had to shepherdize and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And that was part of our training too. We had to we had to work to get an answer.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. It was not
we had to do
button.
our research. It wasn't hitting a button. And maybe in the aggregate, part of that helps us build our moxie as well.
Yeah.
As we move on in our careers. So you get this job, you're working in the library, you're getting into law school. Were you the first lawyer in your family, or were there other lawyers?
In my direct family, my father's brother was an in-house lawyer at AT&T. So, but of my family, I was the first, and he was the first one to tell me, you don't want to work in a law firm forever, a big New York City law firm. You do your 5 or 6 years and go in-house. Yeah, you had to do the work. And when I first came up, the partners that I was working for, some of them had been in World War II. Like this guy, George DeGennaro, had been on aircraft carrier. He was a pilot. I mean, he was landing in the Pacific in the middle of war. Like, and they were hard ass, and things can get stressful. But when someone's been through that, throwing paper at each other, let's face it, it's important, but it's not war, and it's not as risky as war. So, but at the same time, we were held to an extremely high standard. And again, maybe a little bit politically incorrect, but there was a partner who had a stammer, and I had a typo, and he goes, Joe, our clients pay a fortune in fees. You can't have typos. And I'm like, oh my God, like you just can't have a typo. That was so bad if you had a typo in a document. So
I remember when you're bringing up all these little, I can remember so many things like
Some
having
good,
to bring
some
in,
bad memories.
yeah, some good or bad, but having to bring in some type of legal research to the partner when I was clerking and having them judge me and go through the whole thing. And did I screw up this or screw up that? So you obviously end up working in New York.
Right.
You're an associate in New York, and you're doing what type of law in general?
The one step I don't want to skip over, but I did get on law review. I had to write on it. I missed automatic by like 0.2 of a point. I had an 84.8 and 85 got you on, and that was stressful because I remember my uncle telling me, out of St. John's, you want to work in a big New York City law firm. It really helps if you're on law review. And I had to write. They assigned a topic, and it was about RICO. So I learned about RICO, which was interesting. Then I wrote an article, which was assigned to me too, and it was about a case involving the New York Mercantile Exchange, which did get published. I mean, I can still find it online. I remember they wrote a letter saying they were publishing it, and it made Westlaw and Nexus. And I remember, that's where I started learning how to do that kind of research too. Like, I guess in my second year of law school, we had Westlaw, and it was just another tool. I interviewed with a number of firms, and I knew of Shea and Gould. I knew people who had worked there. I went in there, and it's a legendary firm. I mean, you can Google it.
The name rings a bell to me, even though I don't just vaguely, but it rings a bell.
And we have an alumni group. So Bill Shea Stadium was named after him. He was a rainmaker. And Bill Shea worked construction when he was a young guy. His parents are from Ireland. He grew up in Upper Manhattan near the Polo Grounds. Milton Gould was a brilliant litigator, and they formed the firm together. And the New York Magazine listed an article. They said it was a mixture of Blarney and Chutzpah. It was like Irish guys, Italian guys, Jewish guys. My Armenian friend, Aris Hagen. Like, we were an ethnic, in your face, and it said the firm wore its ethnicity like a badge, and like we'd curse, especially if you had a meeting with like Milbank Tweed, like, let's fuck that. And you could see them like, oh, J. Wellington Whitby IV doesn't curse, maybe when he misses a putt at the country club,
So I don't mean to interrupt, but essentially you were a melting pot. You were actually part of what America is supposed to be, right?
Exactly.
You were all different ethnic backgrounds working together.
Yeah, it was a tough place. There were people who screamed. I mean, we had an interesting base of clients. We had a lot of NASDAQ companies that didn't have a general counsel or even an in-house legal department. So I do the usual. I mean, I worked on several IPOs. I worked on the IPO of a company that became Celgene, very successful pharma company that Pfizer bought a few years ago. I worked on an IPO for Mallard Coach Company, which was out of Indiana. They were like a competitor to Winnebago. And I remember we represented the underwriter. We did work for Bear Stearns.
Just so for our listeners, so we can clarify, IPO is initial public offering, underwriting, Bear Stearns, the banks. Essentially what you're doing on behalf of a potential company that wants to go public is you're working to create the documents to get them listed and in compliance, whatever the SEC may need. And then from an underwriting perspective, they're going to write it up for valuation. So it's a lot of heavy compliance and research. And from an intellect perspective, you really have to be sharp in that particular area.
Best summary I've ever heard of an IPO, Keith. That's so true. And there were things I didn't know, like, just the way they're lining up the investors. A lot of it was the networks and all that. And there were people, we had these, the Bleck brothers, they set up a lot of these biotech companies, and some of them succeeded, some didn't. And you had to learn an industry inside out. Like, at one point I knew everything about the mobile home industry, the particular farm or what have you. And with the mobile home Mallard Coach Company, they had a local law firm and a non-Big 8 accounting firm. And I remember like Payne Weber, that was our client. We were the underwriter on that one. We basically said, you got to hire a different law firm, and because we're not going to take an opinion letter from some firm in Indiana. I mean, and I remember thinking that's kind of sad, but that's the way the world worked.
Yeah, no, New York was the place.
And then another memory. I don't remember the exact day in October, but 1987. But somebody, the associate I was working on, said, the Dow's down 500 points. So I remember thinking, I didn't even know what the value of the stock market was. I didn't realize that was a 20% drop in one day. After that, I was very aware of it. But like, he's like, and a couple of deals I was working for, they just dried up. And with the memo, remember another memory, the memo in that brown envelope that you put the string around it, and
then go around,
cross your name up, Stop working on the XYZ IPO, stop working on the every deal. Suddenly we had nothing to do for a while, and it was a little scary because the capital markets were kind of melting down, and it was nowhere near as bad as 08, 09, but it was scary. But one of the partners I was working for had a really interesting group. They were called Worldwide, and they owned a Volkswagen distributor, but they also were in real estate. They built the Worldwide building at 8th Avenue at 50th Street. Victor L. Malley and Frank Stanton. I remember these names because you're hearing them.
Amazing with your names.
Yeah, and so I had a lot of stuff to do during the recession that wasn't necessarily M&A, mergers and acquisitions, or it was just general corporate work, writing resolutions, doing employment agreements. And that's probably what helped me ease into in-house more than anything. Because if all you're doing is initial public offerings or mergers, I mean, it's especially at my level when I was younger, you're basically a glorified copier. You're making photocopies, you're proofreading. You're not really in the trenches.
For sure. For people who are listening, they don't, they may not know that, when you come in as an associate, the legal staff knows substantially more than you know. I mean, you're the legal secretary or the paralegal to a partner or somebody essentially is going to be training you.
Oh, absolutely.
To really get you on your feet. And then you're going to be doing whatever they spoon feed you to do, whatever the partner suggests, where you can get in the least amount of trouble, so to speak,
exactly.
as you build your sea legs.
That's exactly right.
I think what you said about, you kind of drifted into the employment side to help formulate an understanding of corporate life and being in an in-house position. That's really interesting because, my practice is pretty broad. One of the few left that kind of has a general practice, but I have background in employment. I do a lot of labor employment, workers' comp defense. I do a lot of different things on behalf of businesses. I've done a lot of different things. I know enough to be dangerous, so to speak. But in any event, you segue into this in-house role. Where was your first traditional in-house job? Where did you land?
I landed at Merck, which was in New Jersey. I
remember Merck. Yeah.
They had been in Rahway. They were moving to White House Station, very prestigious company. And the assistant general counsel had worked at the law firm I came from. I found a job. I was looking at a classified ad, and I called up the recruiter, and he said, "Do you want to move to Texas?" Whatever job I was looking at, I didn't realize it was in Texas. Like, nah, not really. He goes, but I have an opening at Merck. Fortuitousness, I guess. And now Merck was a huge company, at the time, biggest pharma company, and not a lot was happening. I was doing their securities work. I was doing their filings.
What year was this, Joe?
92 through 94.
Okay.
So I did my 6 years. I got out of law school in 86. I did my 6 years, and I had a feeling I wasn't going to make partner. I was working pretty hard, but I wasn't doing a lot of the show time, and there were people that were just grinds, and you knew they were going to make partner. I mean, they had their heart set on it.
Well, I think for our listeners too, because I always want to be mindful of our listeners.
Yeah.
When you go that route, when you're a lawyer, if that's what you want to be, and you want to go work in Manhattan or do a job in Manhattan on a financial side of things, and you start out as an associate, you got to work your ass off.
Yes.
You got to work really hard, and you're basically a grunt person for many, many years. And if you have any interest in or desire to work your way up the ladder, so to speak, to get to some type of non-equity or partnership level, whatever that may be, I mean, to have an ownership interest, so to speak,
right.
You have to be able to make it rain. You're not going to be, your value is only as good as for how much you can produce. But if you are getting spoon-fed work from another partner, it's his particular client or her particular client, you're a link in a chain, but you're a weak link. But if you have the connection, or you're bringing in the client and you have that, which unfortunately many people don't understand that, and everybody's got a role to play. And there are lawyers who are very good tacticians, right? They just are you give them the work, and you know that in your role, you're going to give them the work, and you know it's going to get done. But don't ask them to have social skills or have the ability to economize, to make money on behalf of a particular business. But you need those people to be able to function. And there's nothing wrong with that. Right. But you have to learn. You'll learn, as you're going through. They don't teach you this in law school, but you learn that, okay, I'm never going to hit that ceiling role. I'm never going to hit that partnership. I don't have the ability to make these connections. I don't have family or friends that are going to, possibly give me that. But now I have another opportunity, where there could be some security involved, and I'm going to learn a lot more from one entity, so to speak, and focus on that entity. So I don't need to segue, but I wanted to give our listeners and some of our viewers our inside view from a legal perspective of what we go through in our careers.
Oh, and you knew who the heavy hit. And it's funny, some of the old line firms I mentioned, they eventually would deed over. And, the old partner dies and somebody else picks up the JP Morgan. But my firm was the term is eat what you kill. I mean, it was like, the 7 or 8 guys that were on the executive committee, all the clients that everybody knew. Jerome Kern had telecommunications. Arnold Jacobs had Bear Stearns. Like, you knew who the rainmakers were. That's what they called them. And then they were the worker partners, and they were partners in name only in a way. I mean, they had no control over their schedules. And and the story, I was working on an IPO in '87 at Cahill Gordon downtown, and then another kind of a fun rite of passage was going to the printer. Like, at some point, you send your documents into the SEC, they comment them on them, and you go to a financial printer and you could bill big slugs of time. I had heard about this, and sure enough, 6 months into it, you're there. You go there on a Saturday, you may be there till Monday. I mean, you may take little naps and stuff. And there's a lot of dead time where you're waiting for the documents to come back, but you're billing the whole thing, and they tell you, go ahead and bill 24 hours. You could order whatever food you want. You could watch sports. There was a certain amount of camaraderie. Going to the printer was not all bad, but there was this guy who was kept leaving the room, and then he finally comes back and he goes, yeah, my wife had her baby. And I remember thinking, wow, you're not there? And wouldn't you know, I ran into the guy 10 years later. He was a partner at Cahill, and I said, I remember when you in '87, you had a baby. He goes, oh, yeah, that was with my ex-wife. And I remember thinking, oh, yeah, what a shocker,
Yeah, exactly.
You're not in the room. And you'd see that. And another guy, the guy that gave the assignments, one time he called me on a Friday. He always called everybody, Mr. Barry, come to my office. And he'd never tell you why. Like, one time he did it when I passed the bar exam, and it was
for drama.
Yeah, but he goes, you're going to find out what it's like to be a big firm associate. I need you to work all weekend. And I was working for this partner who was very erratic, and I was redlining. Remember that? Talk about another exercise of grunt work where you have a document, when you delete a word or change a word, you put like a little a caret or underline. I was doing this manually, and I was redlining off 2 or 3 contracts, so I was never sure if sometimes the word, and some partners change that to which, and then the associate changes which to that. It's like, kind of useless stuff. But, and then this partner had a reputation because he one time was, they were filing something with the Securities Exchange Commission, the SEC, and you have to put a check, whatever the amount of, there's a fee you got to pay when you file it. It's calculated by how many shares you're registering or what have you. And he couldn't find a check, and he started crying. And my friend who was working for him got really unnerved, like when the partner is crying because he was so afraid. And they found somebody else where they were able to get another check. But I mean, there was some wacky people in those law firms, of dysfunctional, a lot of unhappy people, and that was a lesson in itself too. I mean, the rainmakers were happy, but
yeah, the rainmakers are happy to say, it goes into a conversation we'll get into about life and balance, and dealing with family and life issues with your career, and how you find that balance and how you re-energize. But it's crazy how in the beginning you really had to sacrifice a lot. Yep. We all did in different ways to get to where we are, and hopefully. Right. You have an understanding partner at that time, or you're by yourself doing what you can do, or you end up possibly getting divorced depending upon the circumstances.
Yeah.
So you get the job with Merck. You're a babe in the woods, so to speak, and that you're in-house counsel. Tell me that experience. How was that experience?
There was a perception that back then, and it's 30 years ago, some of the in-house lawyers, they were not thought to be as good as law firm lawyers. And there were a couple of people that had come from either very small law firms or 1 or 2 people that had worked in a company their whole life. And it was almost like you're coming in from a big New York City law firm. I don't want to say dumbing it down, but some of the things you're working on, they're not as sophisticated or as hard. And Merck was very staid, and I was doing their what they called it, the 34 Act SEC work, the annual report, the proxy statement. And then we bought a company called Medco, which was what they call a pharmacy benefit management. At one point that was a big, and it was a different line of business. And a couple of their lawyers came over, and I remember one of them telling me, I just got to stay for 6 months, and then everything vested, I'm leaving. Like some of them got nice packages, and they weren't gonna. So it's interesting that the part I was commuting from, I was still living in Manhattan, and I'd be in a cafeteria at a gym, and I'd hear people like, my son has a little league game, I'm going here, and I'd be like, I'm going back and hitting some bars in the Village or Soho. I had a girlfriend. I was a little bit of a fish out of water, and I was talking to the corporate secretary, who's a really good guy, and I'm like, I'm not crazy, I don't like being in the suburbs. He goes, well, here's some people you may want to call, and I called somebody who knew somebody, and who knew a recruiter. And then the recruiter said, well, there's a company called Ogden that's hiring. And I'm like, I know Ogden. They have those trucks that drive around the airport. One of their core businesses was aviation, fueling, baggage handling, so on and so forth. He says, but they have another division, a food and beverage division that sells beer and hot dogs at sports arenas. I'm like, are you serious? I knew who Harry M. Stevens was. Yeah. Well, Ogden was in 30 or so amphitheaters and 5 or 6 Major League Baseball football stadiams and about 10 arenas. And I still in Indiana Pacers, Washington, the downtown Washington. And so I interviewed, and I'm like, this is great. I mean, I really want this job. And so I met the general counsel, who was a good guy, and a couple of the deputies. And they said, there's the main business guy, and he runs, they call it Ogden Entertainment Services. And then eventually we dropped the term service. We just called it Ogden Entertainment. And I go to meet John, and we had a real good guy, Jersey guy, originally from Doylestown, PA. And at one point, it was the day before the Belmont Stakes, and I love horse racing. I've been going to a racetrack for a long time. And at one point, he goes, hey, I got to take one phone call. My wife and I will go to Belmont tomorrow. And I'm like, oh, really? I said, I'm going too. He goes, you like the ponies? I'm like, oh, we were talking for like 45 minutes. His secretary was coming in. Hey, John, you got to call at 3. He goes, oh, reschedule. It's like that feeling. I knew I had the job. And it was an interesting company. It was publicly traded. There was a father-son combo. The father had become the chairman. The son was the CEO. We did a lot of deals. We were selling off a lot of businesses that the son didn't like. We had a janitorial division that just printed money. It was cost plus. And you bid a job. You say you need 3 people. You'd hire 2 people to do the job. Cleaning buildings. And I was there 6 years and got an amazing experience. So John was my business boss, and he'd say things like, Joe, I know the indemnities are important. We have agreements with our customers. We call them facility management agreement, food and beverage concession agreement, because you can't lose a customer over an indemnity. That's the kind of, he was the business guy that taught me how to read financial statements, the importance of relationships with businesses. And it's interesting to see the way business people operate. Like when something does go wrong, as it occasionally does, the first thing lawyers do is, who made that mistake? How'd they screw up? Business people are like, how do we fix it?
Yeah. Well, they say, what they say about lawyers, and I experienced it too, because there was a time period where I in the mid 2000s, I was CEO of a .com, and I went out to California to pitch to venture capital companies to raise money, and I raised some money. We'll talk about that another time. Yeah. But at the end of the day, they basically said to me, "You're a lawyer. Lawyers kill deals. What are you here for as the CEO? You want us to." So we have a rep, unfortunately.
We really do.
We're not business people. Nope. We're there to basically kill the deal.
Yeah, so the Department of Sales Prevention, some people call us. And so John, and I guess, so I'm 60. He's 20 years older than me. Not quite a father figure, but a good guy. And the job was in Manhattan. That was great. We were at 2 Penn Plaza, and I was living in Manhattan. I'd walk to work. It was wonderful. I loved my job. And it's interesting that we were publicly traded. We had a lot of different business units. And in fact, the analysts were like, what are you guys? I mean, at one point, we ran waste to energy power plants, airline, and then food, and beer and hot dogs. And we bought a concert promotion division.
What type of revenue numbers, like in the aggregate? What type of numbers back then?
Back then, it was about $1 billion. My division was $350 million. This is 20.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, sizable. And we had signed a deal to buy a competing company that was called Volume, but originally was called Canteen. They were at Yankee Stadium. And so Aramark was the industry behemoth. And so number 2 and number 3 were going to merge. And number 4 was a family-owned group up in Buffalo. They're still around. They're called Jacobs. They own the Boston Bruins. So there were 4 or 5 players in this space. And we went through the whole Hart-Scott-Rodino. We got clearance. Anyway, one day, it was in September of 99, there was this ferocious Northeaster coming in. And everybody was leaving, but there was a board meeting going on. And a buddy of mine, he was in business development. He had been a lawyer. He's in my office like, what's going on? Like, you could tell what's going on longer than usual. And then the board meeting went on, and no one could, the subways weren't running. I mean, the train, it was a sick Northeaster. And we go in the next day, and they call a meeting, and they say, we're going to sell off everything but the waste to energy. We're selling off the aviation business. We're selling off. And we're like, wow, it was heartbreaking at the time. 39 years old. I'd been there 6 years. I'd loved it. They gave everybody a letter that said, we need you to stick around. You'll get some severance. And then my boss, again, John McAnuff, calls me one day. He goes, you got to come to the conference room. The Goldman Sachs people are here. We're putting a book together, and the general counsel doesn't know anything about any of these deals. He was a big picture guy, but he'd always focused on the other divisions. And I came in, and I'm like, Oh, yeah. But we had all these deals at amphitheaters where we sold the food and beverage. Very simple. You make a percentage. You hand over a percentage of the beer money. You sell $1 million worth of beer. You hand over 35% or whatever it was, and you keep the rest. And that's how you buy your product and all that. And in some cases, we had equity kickers. If the company, if they got sold, we were going to get a piece. And I have a very good memory. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, the Cellador Amphitheater, that's a 10-year deal. There's an equity piece. And then a guy from our Jersey division, who I'd met over the years at various company outings, said he was a lawyer too, but he had business role. He goes, what's your deal, Joe? How long are you around for? I said, I'm here until April of 2000 like everybody else. He goes, no, I need you to stay longer. And he made me an offer to basically help sell the divisions. And I got a...
So you rode the tail.
I rode the tail for almost 2 years. And we did get sold to Aramark. And then I kept extending my deal. And the funny thing is, summer of 2000, I had a buddy who was an investment banker. And so Joe and I rented a house in the Hamptons. And I told my boss, I said, could I work from home? I got a place in the Hamptons, and Mondays and Fridays, I'd rather not have to come in. He goes, oh, yeah, and we'll give you a laptop. But I was sort of ahead of in retrospect, ahead of the curve in working from home, but I was out in the Hamptons and had a wonderful time. And then October, I went to a party at the New York Junior League, and I met my wife, and she was running a little golf game where you pay $5 and you hit the ball, those indoor golf things. And I saw her in there. She was very pretty, and she had a great accent. I was 40. She was 27. She was from Louisville. And her family had been in horse racing and liquor. Her great-grandfather ran a liquor company that he sold to the Seagrams, and he owned racehorses. And I joked, my grandfather was a bartender. He drank a lot, and he liked to bet on the horses. So we had that. And so that's kind of how... I settled down. I got married when I was 42.
You held off for a long time.
My initial group of buddies started getting married. All my siblings got married. Then my brother graduated law school 5 years after I did, and I was hanging out with him and his buddies. Then they all kind of got hooked up. Then some of my friends started getting divorced. Like I was having you have a wingman. You can't go out by yourself.
Sure. You wind down that company. Incredible experience. I mean, from what I'm hearing, Joe, is that you have the unique ability to interact with all different business profiles. In other words, you're kind of like the translator, so to speak, with an industry, in that you've got the legal background, but it's not so secular. You're not just like a linear lawyer legal. You're able to, converse with the business person and get along with the business person. You've got the practical application of the working man. I mean, you've got a lot of different skill sets that it seems that you've over the years developed that.
Yep.
Now, there's something called there's a term that I've read about, and sometimes I've actually felt it. It's called imposter syndrome, and I don't know if you've ever heard of that term, imposter syndrome. But it's essentially where working in your career, doing what we do every day, having success, having some failures, but having success, more successes than failures. But you're questioning your acumen. You're questioning your ability to do what you're doing, even though you validated it over the years.
You are 100% on, Keith. And I driven to a large degree by fear and insecurity. And I had a buddy at the law firm. At one point, he called me Joe Gadsby. He goes, "You're like Gadsby." And I said, "You're so worried it's all going to fall apart." You know what I mean? Self-made. Although no one's really self-made. You know it. Your parents and everybody has a role in making you. But I did always think it's gonna there were times where it's all gonna fall apart. They're gonna find me out. I'm a fraud. I didn't go to the best law school. I may not be that great with finances.
Maybe that's part of it for us, because I went to Seton Hall, and I was a Brooklyn kid. I was always a Armenian Italian background. I always felt like I was being judged. I moved from Jersey to Florida, and it was I was hometown big time. I got very difficult to get a job.
Yeah,
and so I mean. Is there a chip on your shoulder about it? I mean, I don't know. I think there's also that little paranoia behind you that you better make sure you do what you can do. Yeah. And one of the things that I know for me, I always like to make sure that I'm learning. Like if I'm in a room where I'm getting exposed to people, I want to be, I don't want to say the dumbest, but I want to be surrounded by very intelligent people.
And I'll ask questions, and a lot of times somebody else, especially Wall Street guys, they'll use an acronym or a term. And I'll say, what is that? And so 3 or 4 other people will say, I was about to ask the same question. I'm glad I'm not afraid to look stupid, I guess.
Same as me.
I want to know. Don't breeze through and use an acronym. That's what Madoff did, right? I mean, the split strike strategy. What is that? It means you rip people off.
Exactly.
It's a Ponzi scheme.
Well, it goes in the aggregate outside of lawyers, but just in general in life. And for people who are listening to this, young kids who may be listening to this or watching us and talk, one of the things they can get from our discussion point is don't be afraid to ask a question.
Exactly.
The only question that's the stupid question is the one that's not getting asked.
Exactly.
And many people, I think, especially as you get older or you're in a particular position, you don't want to feel vulnerable,
right?
Because you think you're going to get judged by appearing vulnerable. I had the same approach as you, Joe. I learned a long time ago that there's always going to be somebody smarter than me.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm not going to be, a master of everything. What is that? Jack of all trades, master of none.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I want to ask questions because I'm inquisitive and I want to learn.
Exactly.
And I'm not going to, I don't know how to build a car, but I'd like to know how it's built. I'd like to know little things here. And I always use this adage in my office, teases me about it. For we're dealing with the clients, they say, nobody wants to know how the sausage is made, but they want to know it tastes good.
Yeah,
so
that's a good one.
Our role basically is to ensure that the hot dog or the sausage tastes good. So that doesn't mean we know each and everything, but we need to know enough about it in order to get that understanding. So you have that, and how do you get that, right? You get that by asking questions and not being afraid to ask questions, even though we fight that anxiety or that imposter syndrome, because at the end of the day, we're pushing through because we know we want to learn more, and that helps us validate our ability to make the right decisions and learn and be able to be successful in whatever we're doing.
And at some point, you really learn to trust your judgment, your instincts. And that takes a long time. But it's I feel like I'm heading on all cylinders now, but that was not always the case. And you got to trust your instincts, and you got to do the work. You have to have the data.
Yeah, sure. But you're weighing all that. And what are we? We're the sum of all our parts. I always tell people, I said, if you haven't failed in something, then you really haven't done anything.
Exactly.
You haven't taken any risk.
Right.
So you took a risk as it was when you went from, the business sector, working for a law firm, and then going in-house. And then it's like peeling the onion. As you keep going on in your career, you're getting more and more.
And then, talk about what do you want to call it? Failure or like I networked. I knew a lot of people. I met a lawyer, a great guy, and got to know him. And he knew the general counsel of Diageo South America, the world's biggest liquor company. And he knew her, and he introduced us, and she was hiring. And I talked to them. I really liked her, and she liked my style and everything. And now there was a stop in between. I went to work for Brinks for a while, and Brinks, a month after I joined, announced that they were moving to Richmond. I wasn't ready to move yet, so I was like, wow, I took some time off after Ogden got sold, but I ended up getting the Diageo job, and we ultimately, Diageo was in Stamford, they moved to Norwalk, and I was married. We had our first child up in Connecticut, and Diageo, the legal department was a little marginalized. First of all, very politically correct company, politically correct up the wazoo. Corporate communications ran the show, marketing ran the show. Some of the lawyers there were kind of these impediment types, and in fact, the guy I replaced had a reputation for being an impediment and a grind. Now, I developed a very good rapport with, I was working for the Guinness Beer Group and the supply chain. And the guy that ran supply chain, and my boss, Sabina was her name. She was awesome. And she said, here's all the things that Jonathan did wrong. Don't do the same. And one of the lessons I learned there, he never socialized. And Diageo was a very social, somebody would come over from England, you go out to dinner, and he'd never go out and drink with these people. And I was talking with the head of supply chain. He said, I want you to put probabilities on things, like there's a 60% chance you'll be sued, 30%. And no one's ever going to come back and say you were wrong. You said 60 and it happened, but put something, draw a line in the put a stake in the ground. And Jonathan would never do that. He'd be like, oh, it's a risk, but and you got to sort of attempt to quantify the risk and what your mitigation of the risk is. So
absolutely.
So I got promoted. I had a wonderful thing going. My wife was pregnant with a second child. The global general counsel, who was a good guy, he was kind of running the show, and he liked me. He was a good guy, but they brought in somebody who was just a very toxic person, and it took her a long time to find her, and she worked for BJ's. I won't name her name, and she got rid of a couple of my friends, and she brought in her friends. And
everybody's got an agenda. I worked corporate for a period. Everybody has an agenda.
You know it, and she'd say, you guys have been told how good you are, and you got to earn it with me, and just because you've been somewhere a long time. She told me I didn't have a fire in my belly. I mean, I mean, she made my life miserable for about a year. And in retrospect, she should have said, you know what, Joe, I want to bring my own team in. Here's a package, get lost. But instead, she kind of sort of made it about performance, but she never cited anything. And you don't have fire in your belly. we had a meeting. I'll be very candid. I mean, I got a message on a Friday, and I was really stressed. I mean, my son he was not even a year old. My daughter was not even 3. And I called my wife. A message showed up on my calendar, and it was a Friday. And I said, Kelly wants to meet me. I think this is it. And she's like, why do you think that? I could just tell. Sure enough, I go in her office. She goes, things aren't really working out. You don't have a fire in your belly. It's time for us to part ways. Like very kind of nastily. And I said, wow. You know what? I said, if one party to a relationship says the relationship's not working, it's not working. I mean, one's in and one's not. And then I got a little, she said, HR is standing by to talk to you. I said, I really don't feel like speaking to HR today. It's a Friday. I'm just going to kind of go home and think about it. And she goes, all right. And then I went home. I told my wife, and she goes, all right, you could sulk all weekend. And then Monday, you start looking again. And I had a contract, and I knew I was getting a decent amount of severance. I was a vice president. It also said you have to give notice in writing. And I put off HR for a little while. Then I went in, and the lady from HR, she said, well, because it's performance-based. I said, Kelly never said anything about performance. It said no cause termination. And she goes, yeah, all right. Well, when she spoke to you last Friday, so your last day is going to be February 15th. I said, actually, no, you haven't given me the notice in writing yet. I probably shouldn't have told her that. I probably just said it. And then they did. So I got myself another week or so, and I was getting a very nice pay. And I hired the same lawyer my friend Ken had hired, and he asked me a lot of questions about my mortgage and stuff. And I'm a self-made guy. I had a very small mortgage. I had a lot of money. I've been a saver my whole life, but still, it was very stressful. I mean, I lived in Derry, Connecticut. I went
high end.
Exactly. And I remember I went for a physical in that time frame, and I told my doctor, I said, and he goes, Joe, this town is a pressure cooker. It's Wall Street. I was already the least paid guy on the street. Anyway, the guy's 10 years younger than me, making a lot more money than I was because they all worked on Wall Street. We'd go to these parties, and everybody would say, I'm a mortgage-backed security up here, and I'd say, I'm a lawyer for a liquor company. Wow, that sounds interesting. Like they were all in finance. And Wally called me. He was back in Huntington, and he goes, I heard what happened. It sucks. Sabina called me. She was at InBev. And Wally said, if you get sideways with Diageo, I do a lot of work for them. Just think over your options. And then my lawyer said, you probably do have a very good case. Certainly age discrimination, perhaps racial discrimination, but you got to have a tough stomach to go against a big company. They have infinite resources. And anyway, he said, let's see what they offer you. And they made a pretty good offer. And here's the funny part. They sent something over, and it said, you will not disparage Diageo nor its chief marketing officer. So I think they pulled an agreement for the last marketer they fired. They gave me more than I was supposed to get. My lawyer said, Joe, sign it. Don't tell them. Don't point out. Vested all my options. So I ended up getting a year's pay, and my options vested. I had to exercise them by August of 2008. You know what happened in September of 2008, the stock market.
Yeah.
And then in between, I as my wife said, that Monday I started calling people. And I did some consulting gigs, and I had Cobra. I had healthcare coverage for the rest of the year, and my price kept going up. I learned you'd say, well, I typically charge blank. By the time I did work for COD, I was up to $250 an hour because you got to pay your own Social Security and everything. And I was doing that, and I mean, but still, at the back of my mind, none of them was like a full time with benefits and all that. And then Wally calls me in July or August, he said, we have a client in Scottsdale. They want to interview. It's a publicly traded pharma company. I'm like, and he goes, he goes, Joe, they're a great client. Do me a favor. If it, make me look good. He goes, buddy, you got to get out of that. Everything is in New York mindset. There are other places. So I flew out there. I liked everybody.
Beautiful out there. I went out last year.
Yeah. My wife came out for a weekend, and when they made me the offer, the guy called me, the HR guy, I pulled over the side of the road. I'm like, I can't say no to this, especially the stock options. They gave me a ton of stock options. And because it's not hard, believe it or not, it's hard to find people that want to go there. And my role was basically deputy general counsel. The general counsel was a good guy. He dealt with the board and the CEO. That was his full-time job. We have publicly traded. We were New York Stock Exchange. Our revenues were about $700 million, not huge for a New York Stock Exchange company, but
yeah, okay. Still.
But yeah. And then I'm negotiating my start date, and I'm very friendly. I said, I'm moving cross country. I said, a big pharma company. The market cap at that point was the market capitalization of all the shares, the value, what somebody could buy you for at the time was about $500 or $600 million. And I said, that's not, I said, a big pharma could come in and buy us tomorrow. And he goes, well, we'll give you the executive vesting. If the company gets sold, you get all your options, and you get a year's pay and this and that. And then,
I'm going to interrupt you because you're covering another point. I had a very similar circumstance when I worked as a vice president for an insurance company. But when we go from one job to the other, especially dependent upon the position that we're moving into, people don't recognize that you have to plan a potential out strategy.
Yes.
You have to know going in what could potentially happen.
Exactly.
If they're acquired, if you're terminated, so while they can dangle the carrot in front of you on the front end of everything that may seem just, oh my gosh, let me sign at the dotted line. No, they want you. They've told you they want you. You got a little leverage.
It's the only time you have leverage.
It's the only time you have it, right? You're not just going in like just a happy little puppy. I'll take whatever you give me. You are making a conscious decision to negotiate your potential, for lack of a better term, your prenup agreement, right? You're basically.
Keith, great point. And I learned that at Ogden because they recently gave me just a memo, and I negotiated the Monday and Friday and more money. If I had stayed at Brinks until September, I was going to get nominal severance. And I'm like, I called Sabine. I'm like, is there any way I can get a sign-on bonus or anything? Then, of course, I fretted all week. I'm like, I got to pull the offer back. And then they gave me a signing bonus. So I got better every time. And
Medicine
was a very stressful company. It was ruthless. Jonah only hired executives from New York and Los Angeles. We all used New York law firms. We had been under a corporate integrity agreement because of some off-label promotion. There was some things going on in the workplace that weren't always the greatest. I dealt with a lot of mediations.
Was that your first foray into medicine or into pharmacology type position-wise?
The brief stint at Merck, but I wasn't involved. At Merck, I was just doing the security work. This is the first time I was really involved. And you're absolutely right. And in fact, I remember them saying, they really liked me. And I said, I'm coming from a liquor company. And I said, but there's a similar distribution. Liquor is somewhat regulated. It is a drug in a certain sense under the FDA. So I didn't have the science chops, and I certainly didn't know anything about patents or anything. But they said, you could pick that up. We have good outside lawyers. So it was really into heavy pharma. And interestingly enough, when I interviewed, they had a patent lawyer. I won't name her. And the GC told me she's a little erratic. She said she can't stand me. He had inherited it from somebody else. And then he said, wow, even she liked you, but she had a lot of things going on. And sure enough, a month in, they said, we're going to have to move her on. And he goes, could you take over the IP? And my joke was, I was a history major. I don't know anything about patents. But I had it in an interim basis for a year. There's no such, and that's actually a lesson I probably should have said, yeah, I'll take it on, but what do I give up? I mean, that's a full-time job in itself. There's 7 people working for me. My predecessor used a lot of lawyers and got second and third opinions. I remember thinking, that's a little weird. I mean, I don't know much about patents, but how much different can they be from anything else? And I called the various lawyers. I talked to them, and there was this one guy, Brooklyn guy, still good friends, still use him. He had a Brooklyn accent. He goes, Joe, here's what you got to do. And he talked to me. And then there was another patent lawyer who was kind of a jerk, and he'd use patent terms, and I'd have Charlie on my other phone. Hey, Charlie, what's a picture claim? And he'd tell me, and I'd say it, and then this other guy would be like, well, what about that? And I hold on a second. He was Cyrano de Bergerac, and I eventually was able to weed out the people who tried to. There were the patent lawyers that tried to make me look bad. Like they were like, oh, you don't know anything about patents. They looked my back, and I'm like, you work for me, all right? And also,
exactly.
I had to summarize the patent. Again, there's a lot of themes of people who fortuitous right place at the right time, and we were doing. We were looking at buying a couple of products. We pulled the trigger on one, and our biggest product was going off patent. And we knew we were going to have a rough quarter. I've been there now 4 years at this point. This is 2012. And I was told to make a list of who I would have to get rid of if I had to get rid of anybody. And I was in Hawaii on vacation. I remember my wife's like, man up, you're a manager. That's what you signed up for. And when you have to do that, it's amazing how it does come into focus. So you can reverse rank people when you start saying who's the lowest. Because there was one member of my team was not a high performer, and I knew that. One of the things we got coaches. Everybody got coaches. It wasn't just a prelude to being fired. Like a lot of companies that give you a coach, it means they're just trying to check it out. Like these, I learned things about myself. Like I wasn't very well organized. I got 360 feedback. That was.
It's interesting. You're spurring all these memories to me in my corporate world because. Yeah. I remember I was brought on as a change agent, basically to set up a legal department and manage lawyers, so to speak. And part of the job was to control the money that was going out to all outside counsel and lack of controls. But I ended up getting pulled to corporate. We were, they were based out of California. They acquired a Florida company. And they send the company plane for the executives. And I go out to California, and I'm sitting in this huge ballroom with all these high-paid executives. And we're doing Myers-Briggs tests. And we're learning about animals
and what animal we are best at. And then they're trying to teach, they're doing these personality tests. They're trying to basically have you self-reflect and what your management style is. And for me, I remember, and they basically solicited I had too many people reporting to me at the time. And I remember they're basically soliciting from all these other underlings, all these other people, all my deficits, all the things that they felt that I didn't do right. And they said, well, Keith has a tendency he doesn't really explain specifically what he wants us to do. He just wants us to do it. And I used to get so aggravated.
Like boss. I like that.
Right. I just get aggravated because we're like, you're getting paid X amount of dollars. I'm telling you, we need to move the chain this way. I got to specifically do it for you. So one of my cons was that I lacked empathy.
Oh, wow.
That was one of the things that I got
you were ahead of your time because that's one of those terms. No, you are right. And Diageo did it. Medicus did predictive index. And one of the things I've learned from that stuff, you can learn about you. You're not going to change yourself. You're going to have a style.
Sure.
But you learn how to get along with somebody who doesn't have the same attributes and how...
maybe a learning style, right?
B,
how
they give you the letters and a D gets along with an AC.
Yes.
And so even at Diageo, they did a psychometric interview. They'd have a series of progressions of symbols and you had to draw the neck. It was weird stuff. And one of the funny things is they said, what would your wife change about you first? And I said, my accent. They started laughing because my mother-in-law used to say, Joe's accent makes my ears bleed, that New York, she's from Louisville. And then my joke later, I should have said, she really wants me to stop wearing her clothes. But I don't think they would have handled that well.
It'll work better now, right?
Yeah. And it's funny. I was explaining to John McInerney, my old boss who was now a reference, and he goes, that's sort of weird. Like, why would they do that? And I said, remember we had hired somebody and she came to she got hired when we were having an executive meeting off-site that they used to do every year. And she'd worked for the Toronto Blue Jays and she kept saying, well, when I was at Toronto, here's how we do it. When I was at Toronto, here's how we do it. Then she started saying, you guys do it kind of weird. At Toronto, we did. And after a while, if she said Toronto one more time, she lasted about a month. And I remember saying, if we had done that kind of testing on her, that probably would have ferreted it out. Like she would have said something snarky to the person, like, why are you asking me all these questions? And they would have said, maybe not somebody you want to, whatever. It's interesting how, so the predictive index, Myers-Briggs, you get some value out of it. So the guy I was working for, the guy who hired me became the chief operating officer. He's still a good guy, good friend. And then they made the chief compliance officer, the general counsel. And sharp guy, great lawyer. He'd been a criminal lawyer. And I really had to up my game. I had to start. My wife's like, you kind of ramble. You can't just go in and say, be loosey-goosey. Make a little agenda for your meetings and stuff. And I, at a pretty ripe, at that point, I was almost 50 years old. I was able to sort of change elements of my style because part of it was a 360 feedback. People get disconcerted by the absent-minded professional lawyer, and sometimes that flies, but a lot of times it doesn't. And I wasn't like that, but if the perception grows that you like that.
Well, again, it goes to an interesting point where in order for us to grow and the fact that you even went through that process and had the confidence and the wherewithal to make those changes within yourself for purposes of growth and for your ability to lead and, give the vision is important. And again, it goes to that idea where the ego can sometimes blind you, where you think you've earned this place in life in that, no, I don't need to, this is how I've gotten this far this way. So no, you're going to either accept it or not. Well, no, that's not the case. No. If you want to reach everybody and you want to build and grow, you gotta be able to take in a little bit of criticism or whatever it is to help you move forward with dealing with people. And for me, God bless my wife. She's a saint with me because I get passionate about certain things. I can go a certain way with things. And sometimes depending upon your audience, you can lose them. Yep. And your passion can sometimes come across in a different way. So if you're getting feedback from various entities that, maybe you do a little bit of this, at the end of the day, you just want to be successful, right? So self-reflect and that's how you build yourself and get better.
No, absolutely. And you got to subsume the ego a bit and you realize
you're doing it 50. You did it at 50.
I know. And then now to think about the company I mentioned before, pretty small market cap. And then there was definitely consolidation in the industry. And we knew our biggest price going off patent. I made the list. And there was a company out there called Valiant, which was a big name 10 years ago. Valiant was a Wall Street pharma company that was buying a lot of companies. And we were trying to acquire other products, and Valiant beat us out a couple times. And there were rumors they were looking at us. And I had a friend who was at Sullivan & Cromwell, and he even called me. He goes, nothing you can do about this. That there's rumors that Valiant's interested in you guys. And I'm like, I got a contract. Whatever happens, happens. That sure enough, I got a call from my boss. He said, come to the Doubletree Hilton tomorrow. Don't go to the office. I remember thinking, he's not going to fire me. Why would he fire me in a hotel? Like, you're so insecure because there was so many rumors going on. And it was the first meeting with Valiant. And it was one of these things where there have been people talking, and when you do a public company deal, you bring more people in as you go, and I knew all the managed markets agreements. Like we had outside lawyers. We had Weil Gottschall, ironically enough, the company that worked at a long time ago in the library, Latham & Watkins representing us, and our CEO drove an amazing bargain, and they started at one number, and the number they finally landed on was $44 a share. Remember, I had options at 8. So I was like, wow, this is going to be. And meanwhile, I can't really tell my wife. She knew. She's a great, very supportive, and she knows there's something I just can't tell her I work on, because the risk when you're working on a public company deal, they'll go back and look at every trade that were made before you sign the deal.
Insider training. Yeah,
one of my friends bought the stock just because I worked there. They'd be like questioning me. And the funny thing is, my old boss had worked at GE, and he said at GE they had a little joke, like because they did a lot of acquisitions, they'd call you in and say, hey, Keith, we're looking at buying this company. And by the way, you're the 9th person that knows this, and it hasn't gotten out yet. So if it gets out, we're going to know you're the one that's telling people. Like, I'm like, oh God, they didn't quite do that at Medicine, but they, I'm a securities lawyer. They didn't have to tell me this is not something you go around. Hey, buddy, we might get acquired at a huge premium. And we signed a deal, and we had the 3-month antitrust period, which we weren't worried. We didn't have a lot of overlap, and the deal closes. But in between, we're having a lot of meetings with Valiant doing our, it's a very interesting world. I could really go on, but at one point, one of the Valiant lawyers came in to meet us, and this lawyer wasn't being, she's like, I don't know I have to meet all you people. And Valiant had a reputation of firing most people anyway. And I said, you know what? I know my package. I just I don't think I want to work for you guys either. I'll give my time slot up to somebody else. And she was stunned that I said that. The bottom line is, one of the Latham lawyers even came in, and they explained to us, which I'd already read. I was vested in everything. I knew what I was getting. And the CEO, Jonah, great. He said, you guys have given everything to Medicine. These Valiant people aren't looking out for your best interest. If you think you could find something better, but I wasn't going to find anything better. I was getting a year's pay. And after they closed the deal, they said everybody's going to meet with HR like the following day. And 400 people in the headquarters, roughly. They fired about 350. They kept about 50 people, and they expected those 50 people to do the work that everybody. And that was their reputation already, because they've been buying companies up. And I had a meeting with their head of HR. And he said, "Do you have any questions? We're not keeping you on." I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine." I read my package, and then I got the paychecks. And it was like I was sitting there like, "Wow, I actually got a 7-figure payout for the guy from Queens." And
God bless you.
And the thing is, when you get a lot of stock options, some of the stock vests. You can give some of the stock back to pay the taxes. And I had written it all out on a piece of paper. And sure enough, everything worked right. I got everything but it was still more than I ever thought I was going to get, namely because the stock price was so low. And then they fired me. I ended up taking some time off, and not many people ended up staying with them. And the ones that didn't like it. They weren't. And Valiant went on to try to buy other companies. They tried to buy Allergan, and they were giving stock instead of cash, and that didn't work out. And Valiant they're around, but they changed the name to Bausch Health. And I have friends that worked there, and they were fine. But I was happy with what I got, and I also had a lot of colleagues who suddenly didn't have jobs and had really good packages and were starting businesses. And I was doing consulting. I wasn't admitted in Arizona yet, so I was calling it business consulting, but I eventually got admitted in Arizona. So I was thinking of making a go of it. I talked to Greenberg Traurig. I knew somebody there, and they said, make up a book of business. And I remember thinking, how do you do that? And they're like, write down everybody you know at a company and say they're a potential client, and you'll build. But then one of my former colleagues ended up at Merz, and that's how it all came about. He introduced me to the then CEO at the time. I started interviewing, and Merz had launched Xeomin, which was the third toxin on the market. Medicine had launched the second toxin, Dysport, and then so it was Botox, Xeomin, Dysport. Very similar types of products as I'd sold at Medicine or worked on. So And it all came together. I mean, it was 10 years ago, right around this time I was interviewing with them, and then I started the summer of 13.
Wow. Wow. So that brought you to Merz.
And then
Wow.
that brought me to Merz.
That's all for today's episode of Pro-2-Pro. I hope you enjoyed hearing from our guest and gained some valuable insights into the world of entrepreneurship. Like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest episodes. And don't forget to follow us on social media. Thanks for watching and listening, and remember to keep it Pro-2-Pro.